now being recorded. Today, we're going to talk about economics, and we have Professor Dale Johnson with us today. He works with the Extension Department as a farm specialist, and he also teaches on campus. So he's going to bring with us and talk about the economics of small flocks and particularly about feeding in those parts. Dale?
I appreciate being with you today, and you can hear me okay. Is that right, John?
Yes. Sorry, I just muted myself when you said that.
Today, I'm going to speak from my own experience in raising small flock broilers, layers, and turkeys, and also my experience in working with other small flock producers. And we're going to talk about the economics of small-scale poultry production. And today, we're going to do this through looking at enterprise budgets. This is a spreadsheet. This is an Excel spreadsheet, or it would be adaptable to Google Sheets. And we will make this spreadsheet available to you if you want this spreadsheet. And so we're going to talk about enterprise budgets. And an enterprise budget is an economic analysis of an enterprise or a profit center, a specific thing you're producing. Okay, where are you making and it tells you where are you making your money and how much are you making? You know, am I making more off my broilers or my layers or my turkeys? That's the questions we're going to answer today. And I like enterprise budgets because an enterprise budget forces you to understand everything about your enterprise. You can't do an enterprise budget unless you understand exactly what you're doing, because it forces you to look at all aspects of production and marketing and finance in order to be able to do it. An enterprise budget, in an enterprise budget, you answer the question, what are you producing and selling? Who are your customers? How will you market your product to them? And these are kind of in order. First of all, it's like, okay, I'm going to grow broilers, or I'm going to grow layers, or I'm going to grow turkeys. But the next question is, who's going to buy them? So, you know, how am I going to market these things, and who are my customers going to be? Because that is going to affect all of the rest of the questions that I'm going to ask here. What are the characteristics of my product? If I've got layers, are they pastured layers? Are they organic? Are they colored eggs or white eggs or brown eggs? You know, what is it that I'm producing here? How am I going to price my product? Well, that very much depends on your customers. And pricing is a very complicated thing, really, trying to figure out what price, because you want to get the price right at the beginning. And we're going to talk more about that. How much product will you produce and sell? In other words, what is your scale of operation? How will you produce your product? What is your production system? What is your production time frame? What are your production inputs, quantities, and prices? What do I have to do in order to produce these things? And then the enterprise budgets can be a historical analysis, or they can be a forecast for the future. So we're going to dive right into this. And I'm going to go through these budgets. I'm not going to take questions at this point. I'm going to stay on afterwards and answer all the questions you've got. So you may want to put your questions in the chat box so we have it there so you don't forget. Or you might just want to write it down and I can answer your questions at the end. But in order to get through all this, I don't want to take questions right now, because my experience is that we can really get into this. And when we really get into it, we don't cover very much area. So let's talk about the budgets first, and then we'll get into it and answer the questions. So the first thing if you look at the bottom of this spreadsheet, here's the overview that I just went over. And now I've got layers, broilers, and turkeys, and we're going to begin with the layer budget today. In enterprise budgeting, the first thing you do is identify your enterprise, and in this case, it's layer. I'm going to grow layered chickens, egg chickens. All right. Then an important thing about enterprise budgets is the time frame. You know, what is the production time frame? Oftentimes it's a year. Okay. Sometimes it's a crop year. Sometimes it's it can be just a short period of time, which we'll see with the layer budget. Okay. In this case, with the layer budget, this is a 2-year production. And the reason I chose 2 years is that after 2 years, layers start decreasing in their production. Their production starts going down. Now, I know a lot of people that keep them for 3 years. I mean, some people keep them for many years, but that's not economical at all to keep them for many years. Some people keep them for 2.5 years. Some people keep them for 3 years. And if you do that, then you need to have a budget for 3 years. I'm going to have a 2-year budget here because I'm maximizing the production yield. Okay. And in this budget, we're going to talk about, I've got the number, which is 100. Now I've got this budget set up so that if I want to put in 200, everything changes. Okay, so I like to choose numbers that are easily scalable, 25 or 50 or 100 or 500 or 1,000. Choose numbers that you can scale up. And I just happen to like the number 100. That's easy to scale up. Okay, of these chickens, we always need to be thinking about mortality. And typically I have, over a 2-year period, I have 5 to 10% of my hens that die for one reason or another. With layer hens, usually it's closer to 5%. They're pretty hardy birds, especially most of the breeds are pretty hardy. Okay. And during that 2-year production, these chickens are going to be laying eggs for me, but they're not going to be laying them for 2 years because I'm going to raise these chickens, these layers from chicks. Now you may be buying pullets, okay? So in that case, it's going to be a different budget, but I'm raising my own chicks here. So you've got to decide, that's part of the production system. Will you raise your layers or will you buy pullets? And so since I am raising these, I've got 730 days. And so I'll just show you my formula here. I'm going to take out 150 days to raise these to layer age when they start laying. And I'm going to take out another 30 days for molting. Okay. And I think I've got enough days in here. When I subtract 180 days, I think that's enough. Maybe I didn't need to subtract quite that many, but I'm going to have 550 laying days. All right. And then my yield. This is the yield per day. And this is a tough figure to come up with. All right. I will say that oftentimes people overestimate this. Some people say, well, my chickens are going to lay 90%, which means in 10 days, with 100 chickens, you'll get 90 eggs. All right. I'm putting 70% in here. Okay. Now, I actually don't figure the mortality in here anywhere. I just have it. Well, you'll see it where I use it here. I don't figure the mortality. I just say 70 includes the mortality. Okay. And then, of course, with an enterprise budget, it's easy to change these figures. But I'm putting in a 70% egg yield. Out of 10 days, a hen will lay 7 eggs, or 100 chickens will lay 70 eggs. All right. So our enterprise budget is set up so that we have our income and our expenses, and then we look at some other things in our budget. All right. Well, the primary income here is I'm selling eggs, and the unit is a dozen. That's usually the unit we sell eggs in. And so how many dozen am I going to sell? Well, in my enterprise budget here, I have it set up so I'm going to sell 100 times 550 days times 70% divided by 12. Okay, one more time. I've got 100 chickens producing for 550 days times 70% egg yield. And then I divide that number by 12 and I get 3,200 dozen that I'm going to produce over 2 years. I want to keep emphasizing that. That's not a year. That's over 2 years of production. Okay. And then the next key figure in the budget is the price. What price am I going to sell them at? Well, that's always a tough question. If I'm just starting up, you got to get the price right, because you want to charge the highest price you can that customers are willing to pay, because your customers don't like you raising prices. All right. And if you start at too high a price, you may not get the customers, and you've already done the damage. You can't lower your price because some customers won't even come back. They won't even come back to see that you've lowered price. So you got to try and get this price right. So you just ask around. There's other people producing eggs. You kind of look at your customers, you get a feel for it. Of course, you look at what they're selling for in the store, but but the store is not your competition, because you're going to be charging more than the store, because you're offering a different product than the store. And you've got to be charging more than the store, because the eggs produced in the store, you can't compete with them. They do it on a large scale, and they're economical, and you can't compete with those eggs. So those prices there. So you've got a different product here. And so I've got $6 here, and that's what I could get in Washington County, where I live, if I produced eggs right now. All right. It always bothers me when I drive down the road and I see a sign that says eggs for sale, $3 a dozen or $4 a dozen, when I know the prices, they could get a higher price, because it kind of ruins it for the rest of us. So, you want to kind of, you don't want to try and undercut your competition, because that's not going to do anybody any good. If you see a sign on the road that says $6 a dozen, don't undercut them. Just get yourself some different customers. And if you see a sign on the road that says $3 a dozen, you might want to stop and say, you could earn a lot more. If you need to raise your price. In my budget, I've got the stewing hens. A lot of people, you got to do something with those. At the end of 2 years, what are you going to do with them? Well, they're not, they're not broilers. They're stewing hens. There's not much meat on some of these breeds. Leghorns don't have hardly any meat on them. A sex-linked chicken, a Rhode Island cross, they don't have a lot of meat on them. But if you might tell people, this is a good stewing hen. You're going to get some good soup out of this chicken, and you might be able to sell people. This is a hen that's been pastured for 2 years. There's not much meat on it, but it's good meat, and you can make good chicken noodle soup out of it. So you might be able to sell them, and you might be able to get some money out of them. I've got $12 in here for those, for 90 stewing hens. I've got my 10% mortality in there. Maybe I want to put in 5%. Okay, mortality. And whatever you think it's going to be. All right, so now I've got my income, my egg income, and the hens when I get rid of them. And again, this is income for 2 years. All right, now I come down to my expenses. And before I take off on expenses, I just want to say that, if these budgets are available to you, but you need to go through each line and make it your own. What are you going to put on each line? What formula are you going to put in? What are your numbers going to be? What are your prices going to be? What's your yield going to be? You can change the formulas. You can add rows if you need to. You can subtract rows. I think it's a pretty good budget, and you might find it useful. But there may be things that you need to add or subtract out of here, or definitely things that you need to change if you do this budget. All right, as I mentioned before, I'm going to raise these layers from chicks. And so I've got 100 chicks in there at $4 a chick, and I just checked on a couple of websites, and yeah, if I buy 100 layers, I can get them for $4 a chick right now. But see, I did my homework. You got to figure out, maybe you can get them cheaper. All right, that'd be great if you can get them cheaper, or maybe it's going to cost you a little bit more. So you got to do your homework. Where am I getting my chicks from? And of course, all this gets back to, what breed am I going to have? Some people might say, well, I'm going to have a dual purpose chicken. In that case, I'm going to reduce that yield down to 50 or 60%, but I might have some really good chickens that after 2 years that I might be able to put this price up a little bit. I don't think it's going to offset. I would always suggest if you're going to have a layer operation, then buy real layer chickens, Leghorns or Rhode Island crosses, so that you get good production. Let me point out one other thing here. You see these numbers out to the side. Well, here is my assumptions down here. It explains each one of these lines. And when you do your own budget, you want to go put in your own assumptions, because sometimes you forget. Now, if you look at the formulas, that will help you remember how you did it. But sometimes you're looking at the formula and think, well, now what does that formula mean? So you always want to put your assumptions in when you're doing your budgets. Now we get down into the feed, and of course, feed is the big cost. In any livestock operation, feed's the big cost. And this defines your production system too. If I'm going to have organic chickens, organic eggs, these costs are going to go up dramatically. Okay. And if you're going to have organic eggs, your price better go up too. Okay. So it's all tied in together. Maybe you can, if you're going to grow 300 broilers or 500 layers, 300 layers or 500 layers, maybe you can get feed brought in bulk, and you can get it cheaper than the bagged feed that I have here. So you got to think about this, and you got to think about, what is my feed conversion ratio? How much feed does it take to produce a dozen eggs? And in this budget, I think I've got it down here somewhere. Down here, bagged feed from a reputable feed company. The feed conversion is 4 pounds of feed per dozen eggs. This ratio assumes that the layers have access to pasture where they get some nutrition. They don't get a lot of nutrition from pasture. I mean, people look at all that pasture out there and the chickens eat it down. They think, well, they got a lot. Well, you got to remember that a lot of that pasture is water. In all those broadleaf plants and those grasses, there's a lot of water. So they will get something out of it. And at the height of the pasture season, they might get 25%, 30% or more from the pasture, but don't count on it a lot. Okay. So I've got about 4 pounds of feed in here per dozen eggs. If you were to do these calculations, I got 8 bags of chick starter for 100 layers, 15 bags of early bird grower, and 240 bags of layer feed. Again, that's for 2 years. Okay, at 3,200 dozen. You also have, even in bag feed, you've got your decisions. Should I buy layer mash or should I buy pellets? The pellets cost more, but I like the pellets, because when I see that layer mash all over the ground and the chickens aren't eating it, I like the pellets, because they'll pick the pellets up off the ground. Costs more, but I like it. Other people say, I don't really lose that much. Maybe your feeders are better, so the mash works better. Mash is cheaper. The nutrition, you can get similar nutritional values out of the pellets or mash. So you've got to decide, what is your feeding system? That's why I like enterprise budgets. That's what I've got to be thinking about. What kind of feed am I going to feed here? Okay, I've got the next thing I've got in here is bedding. And this might be, I like straw bedding myself. Some people use wood shavings. John might be able to, some people say wood shavings aren't good for chickens. And John, you might put that in the chat box or something. I've been told that sawdust, or wood, I think sawdust is what I'm talking about. Bales of sawdust. I've heard that that's not good. And I quit using it myself. Wood shavings are different. Again, I use straw. So I've got my bedding in here, 10 bales of straw. And that's for my broiler house, which I'm going to talk about, or my layer house, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, and for brooding the chicks. Okay. Cartons. The first time I did a layer budget, I forgot to put the cartons in, and then I presented it at a workshop, and it was really embarrassing because people are saying, well, Dale, where's your cartons? And so it's like, what kind of economist are you that leave out something important like that? So yeah, I got the cartons in now. And 50 cents per carton, you might get them cheaper than that. All right, you want to you always want to be looking to see where you can economize. And you may have your clientele where you're getting those cartons back. I mean, my daughter right now is selling eggs out of their backyard farm, and they get the cartons back. So that, of course, that dramatically reduced cost. Pretty significant cost here, $1,600 for 2 years. So if you get cartons back, that can certainly help. I'm going to sell these hens for stewing, but I'm not going to slaughter them myself. I'm going to have somebody else slaughter them. So here's my mileage to the slaughter facility. And you may not even be able to find, this might not even be an option because you can't even find somebody who can do it for you so that you can sell them. Because depending on where you're at, you've got to follow the regulations. So you may or may not be able to find some place that can do it for you. I've got my slaughter fee in here. I've got 95 hens after that 5% mortality, $5, maybe more than that. I doubt that it's much less than that. $5 a bird as a slaughtering fee. Usually what you're looking for is somebody who will slaughter the hen and put it in a shrink wrapped bag. Okay, a plastic bag minimum, but if it's better if it's shrink wrapped. And oftentimes they're doing that now because it just doesn't take them that much longer to shrink wrap it. They just put their vacuum on for about 2 seconds and it's done. So you want to, if you're going to sell those hens and try to get $12 out of them, you want to have some reasonable product to give to your customers. Okay, now we have labor expense. And I don't have anything in there. Because what I'm going to do with this budget is I'm going to take the profit for my labor. All right. So when we get down to the bottom line, that's what I'm getting for my labor. Now, if you're going to hire somebody, you definitely got to put it in there. Or you may want to put in a labor cost for yourself, labor and management for yourself. You say, okay, this is what I got to pay myself. All right. But I prefer just to say, okay, the bottom line, that's what I'm going to get. All right, right here, this is what I'm going to get for my labor. All right, now I have another cost in here, fixed expenses. All right, the fixed expenses are this layer house right here, this fencing, the feeders, the waterers, the brooding lamp, and so forth. I've got it down here. All right, now I bought my layer house for $200. Now, if I had to do over again, I wouldn't have done it because I had to pull it across the county, and it was dangerous. It's built on an old hay wagon. I forgot what you call it. It was built out of an old hay wagon rig, and somebody had built it. Nice building, but it was very precarious pulling it across the county behind my pickup. But oftentimes you can build these. You can get these wagons anywhere and build a building on it. $2,000 is, you can do it for $2,000. You can have a pretty good building for $2,000. Oftentimes you can find the materials cheap, old materials cheap, and it doesn't have to be pretty. It needs to be functional. In my layer house, it's got layer boxes open down the side so I can get the eggs from the outside so I don't have to go up in there. You want to be thinking about things like that because that affects how much time it takes to do this. All right. Of course, there's other ways to do this too. You can have other types of portable buildings with portable nesting boxes. There's all kinds of different ways to do it. But again, the enterprise makes you think about how you're going to house these layers. I like this system of a layer house that I can pull around the field with electric netting. I like that system a lot because I only have to move these hens every couple of weeks. With the amount of fencing I've got, I only have to move them every couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. All right. So the infrared heater for brooding, and okay, that my housing startup costs include the fencing also. And electric fencing doesn't cost that much. It's pretty reasonable. I've got my feeders and waters in here. All right. Now I don't have that cost up here. One reason I don't is because this stuff lasts for a long time. Okay. I mean, it really lasts a long time. And if I wanted to sell that layer house right there, I can get more than I paid for it. Okay. And so I don't put these costs up here, but I could. For example, I've got $2,500 down here. Let's say I wanted to depreciate that out over 5 years. I want to recoup it over 5 years. Well, 2,500 divided by 5 years, $500. Well, I almost forgot. This is a 2-year budget. This is a 2-year budget. I almost forgot that. Let's say 10 years. Okay. So I'm going to take 20% of it over 2 years. So 20% times 2,500 is $500. All right. So I could put that in here real easy. And I'll just leave that in for now. I've got my fixed expenses built in there. And again, the way I did that, I thought, okay, this stuff will all last about 10 years. And this is a 2-year budget. I remembered that just as I was doing the calculation for you. So I'm going to take 20% of that 10 years for my first 2 years. 20% of $2,500 is $500. So there's my total expenses. All right. And a useful figure is if I take my total expense and I divide my production, my dozen eggs into it, $7,308 in expenses divided by 3,200 dozen, it's costing me $2.28 per dozen to produce these eggs. I haven't got my labor in there yet, but that's how much it's costing me to produce these eggs. All right. If I subtract my expenses from my income, I'm making $13,000 per 2 years. You have to stress that. So I'm making about $6,500 a year off of 100 hens. Okay. And, you know, if this was 200 hens, most of these are variable cost. So it's almost twice as much. Now I'm making $13,000 a year. Okay, I'm going to go back and leave the 100 in there. Okay, here I have what I call a yield price matrix. It's kind of these are loose calculations. What I'm doing is here I'm taking $6 times 3,200 dozen minus my expenses. Here is my estimate of what I'm going to produce, $13,000 right in the middle. But what if I have a lower price and lower production? You can see I've just taken a dollar off here, or I've added a dollar. And over here on production, it's like, what if my production is only 90% of what I think it's going to be? Or what if it's 110% of what I think it's going to be? So kind of my worst case scenario is 90% of my estimate times $5 minus my expenses. I may only make $8,000. But if I can find really good customers and get $7, and I can get my production up to 110% of what I think it's going to be. In other words, I'm kind of moving that 70% up there. 110% of what I think it's going to be, I might be able to make $18,000. Or there's various other scenarios here. Okay, we've talked about the other resources, but now let's talk about this labor that I haven't charged myself yet. Well, I've just told myself I'm getting $13,000 for my labor here. You know, I'm not paying anybody else. I'm doing the work myself. All right, well, how much time is it going to take me? Well, there's 730 days. I think it's going to take about a half hour a day to gather these eggs, wash them, and get them to my customers. All right. Maybe you think, well, it's going to take longer than that. Well, maybe it will. Or maybe you can do it a little bit faster. Now, if you have 200 hens or 300 or 400 hens, usually the time doesn't go up linearly. I mean, if you have 400 hens, it doesn't take 2 hours a day. If you have 400 hens, it probably only takes an hour or an hour and a half a day. Okay. So you need to be thinking about that. There's economies of scale in labor. All right. If you have more hens, those few extra hens don't take you that much longer to do. But I've got 730 days times a half hour a day, 365 hours. If I divide that into my profit, I'm making $36 an hour, $35.84 an hour, $36 an hour. That's not bad for this enterprise. It's really not bad if I've got my children doing this enterprise and they're doing this enterprise and they're making the money. Pretty good money for younger people. Of course, if I think this is going to take me 3/4 of an hour, okay, takes my profit down to $23 per hour. Those are the kinds of things you want to play around with when you're doing your enterprise budget. Okay, let me think if there's anything else I want to. I'm looking at my time, and yes, I have to move on. I will take questions at the end. Corrections. You may even have some corrections that, well, there's a number here that I don't think is right. Well, you may be right. So we might have some corrections at the end here too. I think I've pretty much talked about everything I wanted to here. So let's move on to a broiler budget. Okay. And again, I have to define my operation. Well, this is Cornish Cross broiler budget. These are the typical broiler chickens. I've done Freedom Rangers, okay? And Freedom Rangers are hardy birds. I don't ever lose any of them. They're great birds, but I've done the economics, and the economics are just not there. I've always gone back to the Cornish Cross because it's economics. Now, if you get some people that want those Freedom Rangers or an heirloom breed of meat chicken or whatever, and people will pay you premium prices, great. You've got that, but that's what you've got to figure out. All right. And so again, I choose a number that's scalable. 100 flock, 100 bird broiler flock here. Okay, I've got a 10% mortality. In my operations, it's at least 10%. Many years, I've got 15, 20%. My first flock that I ever did, it was a 60%. I can't get it. I don't have time for that story. That was a disaster. But I've got it down to where I hope to have a 10% or less mortality. I have a tough time with broilers. Okay, this is my system here, and I have a tough time with it. So 10% minimum on my mortality. Carcass weight, well, that is purely a marketing decision. What do your customers want? Okay, many customers now want that 5-pound carcass for 1 meal for a couple of people. And, depending on how they use that bird, it might be enough for 2 people and their 1 or 2 children, or for their soup. But you may have customers that want the 6 or 7 or 8-pound bird. So then you've got to figure out, how do you do that? Well, now, the nice thing about a straight run Cornish crosses and broilers is that you can have different weights if you want. Okay, the hens are going to be weigh less than the males. All right, and you can pull some birds out at different times at different weights. Okay, so the one thing you might do here is just say, okay, what is my average weight? All right. And your average weight might be 6 pounds because you're dealing with different customers, or 7 pounds. So I think average weight is a better way to look at this. Now, and this is important, the number of days that it takes to get to your average weight. And again, this is the carcass weight. All right. It is not live weight, it's carcass weight. How many days does it take to get there? Because how many days determines how many flocks per year. It determines how much feed, determines a lot of things. So you've got to figure that out. How many days to get that flock? All right. And so as we're looking up here, this is not a 2-year budget. This is a 8-week budget. This budget is for 8 weeks of production. Then I'm going to decide how many flocks can I get a year. All right. Usually it's from spring until fall. So am I going to get 4 flocks? Am I going to get 5 flocks? 3 flocks? You've got to figure that out. All right. So we go down here, and the income with my mortality of 10%, 100 birds times 5 pounds average carcass rate times 10%, or minus 10%, 450 pounds, 450 pounds of meat that I'm going to be selling in those 90 birds that are going to make it to slaughter. 90 birds to make it to slaughter, 450 pounds. Price. That is always the difficult one to come up with. What price can I get? And I've got $3.50 in here. That's what I could get in Washington County here. I learned a concept from our marketing specialist, who is now retired, Ginger Myers. Some of you may know her. She got around a lot. And she talked about a threshold price for your chickens. And it wasn't per pound. It's per chicken. She says a lot of people have an idea about how much they want to put out for a chicken. All right. Now let's look at some extremes. You go into Costco or Sam's Club and you can get a rotisserie chicken for $5. A rotisserie, it's already cooked. They're pretty good chickens. $5. Well, of course you're not going to compete with that. But then you have to go look at the whole birds, or what price. You look at the whole birds, and people look at the whole birds, and they know that if they buy the birds from you, they got to pay more, because you've got, your chickens are pasture chickens. They may be organic, okay, they may be all natural, however you define that, okay. But you're looking at, they know that they got to pay you more, but most people have a threshold, okay, and it's usually kind of a rounded number. Like some people say, well, I'm not going to pay more than $10 for a bird. Well, you're simply not going to sell to them because you can't get your price down that much. Some people are going to say, well, $15, that's about it. If I have to pay more than 15, I'm just going to buy them from the store. Or you may have a clientele that's well-to-do, and they might say, I'm not going to pay more than $19 for a bird or $20 for a bird. Okay. So you have to figure out what that threshold is, and then you work it backwards through the pounds and the price to figure out, what your price is going to be. All right. So my point here is you really got to think through, how do you price these chickens? All right. And I've got 450 pounds in here at $3.50 a pound. What is that threshold? 350 times 5. The threshold I've got here is 17.5. Actually, I don't think that's much of a threshold. People don't think in those terms. So I might want to put that price up a little bit to where I can get that $19 out of it that I think these people might pay. Or, well, I can't take it much lower. You're going to see that I can't take my price much lower. All right. Now we're going to go through, and I'm going to go through faster on these things here because we've already gone through it with the layers. I've got my feed in here, and the feed conversion I have in here is 2.2 pounds of feed to 1 pound dressed weight. That is also assuming that these chickens will probably get 25, 30% out of that pasture. Okay, so that's what you got to be thinking about. How much are they going to get at pasture? How much are they going to get out of the pasture? And what is the feed conversion going to be? And that's what I base my bagged feed on. Okay. And then I've got my bedding for the chicks. And I've got my slaughter weight in there. And if you're really serious about broilers, you might actually think about processing them yourself. You're going to have to go out and buy all the equipment. Okay. But if you're going to do this for many years, that $450 is money that you could put into your own labor through processing the birds yourself. If you have somebody else process them, you got to make sure it's a facility that meets the regulations. Okay. So I've got my total expenses here. My expense per pound. Again, we're not going to go in detail over these again like we did with the layer budget. My expense per pound. Look at this. Income minus my cash expenses, $356. That's not very much money. But it is only for 8 weeks. I'm making that much money in 8 weeks. And if I'm going to have 5 flocks, 4 or 5 flocks, need to multiply that by 4 or 5 during the year. Did you see how much I'm going to make in 1 year? Okay. I've got my yield price matrix like I did for the broiler budget. And then same thing about housing. I could go ahead and put the housing up here. If I put the housing up here, it's just going to take that profit down a little bit more. But you need to think about these startup costs. All right. You gotta get this money to get you going. And some of this stuff does wear out a little bit. These do last a long time. I built these cages myself, and they lasted they're starting to deteriorate now. After about 17 years, they're starting to deteriorate. They lasted a long time. I got my money's worth out of them. Here's my labor hours, 56 days times a half hour a day, 28 hours. I'm only making $13 an hour with these broilers versus I was making quite a bit more for the layers. Okay. And then, maybe somehow you can economize in some of these areas. Maybe, you want to take out that, you want to do the work yourself. You want to do your work yourself. Well, you got to work to get it. And I got to put the time in here. I haven't got the time in here for slaughtering those chickens. Okay. But that might be something you want to do. Okay. So, it looks quite a bit like a layer budget, but the big differences is the time frame. Okay. And it really is a different production system here. Okay. Now, if I had it to do over, I might have a similar system to my layer system with the electric fencing. These are the Salatin type coops that Joe Salatin made popular. Okay. And, if you ever do this, I would encourage you to do the 12-foot, 12 by 12s that Joel Salatin has. I did 8 by 8 foot because I had children that I wanted to move these, and they're a little bit lighter. But you want to go 12 by 12 because you got 144 square feet versus 64 square feet in mine. But if I had it all to do it over again, I'd use the electric fencing with a shelter in the middle for the broilers, just like the layers. I think I like that system better. And I've just got some pictures of slaughtering the birds. Again, you may make some money in slaughtering the birds yourself. All right. I'm just going to throw up a couple of slides down here. John Moyle and I are both working in Kenya with broiler producers in Kenya. And it was fun to go in and help them, these people slaughter their chickens. Of course, you decapitate them, bleed them out. There's no killing cones. I told them they got to buy the killing cones because they're not that much. I mean, you can just get some plastic cones and make this yourself. It doesn't have to be stainless steel over there. And I haven't talked them into it yet because it's a lot easier than what you're doing here in having to hold these birds while they're flapping around after you cut the head off. And so we scald them over in a big scalding pot right here, which they can't keep an even temperature. So they were either overcooking them or not scalding them enough so that the feathers came out. It was a constant problem. Of course, we had to pluck them by hand, eviscerate the carcasses, clean the organs, cool the carcass and the organs. In Kenya, all parts of the bird are consumed, except for the feathers, of course. Every part of the bird is consumed, even the head. Okay. Now, there was a special treat that I had while helping them. What you do is you clean the intestine out, you empty it out, you squeeze out the intestine, you leave a little bit in there for spice. Okay. Then you wrap the intestine around the chicken foot right there. You see that right there. And then you throw this underneath the scalding pot on the hot coals. And in a few minutes, you got a nice treat for you to enjoy. You can see how much I enjoyed it by the look on my face. All right, I am going to just take a couple more minutes for the turkey budget. It looks very much like a broiler budget. Okay. And, but turkeys are a completely different thing. I mean, it really is a holiday bird. This is Thanksgiving. This is a Thanksgiving Christmas enterprise, because usually people are not going to be buying your expensive birds for, eating routinely. So, you're probably only going to have 1 or 2 flocks, or probably maybe 2 flocks, because some of them you're going to keep a little bit longer for Christmas. All right. So you got to be thinking about those types of things. Weight is really important on turkeys. Okay. How big a turkey do your customers want? And I've noticed that these heirloom turkeys, they do have a different taste. Okay. So you might want to think about the heirloom turkeys. Another market out there, it's not a very big market, but that is for large birds. This is for wealthy people who want to show off a 40-pound or 50-pound bird on their Thanksgiving table, where they have all of those people around their table. Now, I'm telling you, I've never actually seen this enterprise, but I've produced that bird right there. I think is 48 pounds. Okay, that is a big bird. That's 48 pounds. Okay, if you're going to sell these, somebody's got to fork over $500 for a bird, because it takes that much to grow them out. They're not economical to grow out to that weight. All right. My point is, this is a totally different marketing scheme. What do your customers want in a turkey, and how are you going to produce it? The actual production is similar. This is what I would do for my broilers if I had to do over again. A shelter with the electric fencing. Okay, I like that better than the Salatin type coops. All right, and I've done both of them. All right, so I'll let you take a look at this turkey budget on your own. I'm running out of time. John says I should have shut up 10 minutes ago. So I am now ready to take questions from anybody. Corrections from anybody if you want to correct any of my budgets. Or if you have your own experience. Yes, if you have your own experience, pitch in here. John, go ahead.
I was going to say that there is one question for you, and it is asking, do you process your own stewing hens yourself?
No, I don't.
Yeah, it's okay, because he answered that by putting in the slaughter fee. So, yeah. I asked before we got there.
And actually, I've never slaughtered my own broilers. I'm helping a friend out slaughter broilers here. Okay, I'm very good on the killing cones. I'm not so good at eviscerating them. I guess I could get good if I practice long enough. I watch their hands fly when they're cutting them up or eviscerating them. One more thing. This was actually at Butler's Orchard in Montgomery County, and I was working they're friends of mine, and I went to help them for the day. And they told me that when people started coming in to buy their broilers, the Asian market, they were asking, well, where's the feet? They want the feet. Well, we just throw them away. Well, they learn real quick that you bag those feet up and sell them. And I will tell you that the feet is not what bothered me down here. It was the intestine wrapped around. It was just the taste in the intestine. The feet don't bother me. Chicken feet, they've got meat on them. Once you take the scales off, it's just like other part of the chicken. It's got good meat on it. So think about that. You can sell those feet, make another $250 for a bag of feet. All right, John, I'm rambling here. Cut me off.
No, it's no worries. I actually don't see any other questions, but everybody's really wanting to get a hold of the spreadsheets. And Dale, when you send those to us, we'll put them on our website as well as share them through the Backyard Farming series as well. Okay, 2 questions. Are there any required permits to sell eggs from your backyard flock to the public? What is the recommended minimum equipment needed to process meat birds?
All right, and John, you can help pitch into this too. My understanding is, first of all, okay, go ahead, John. Go ahead, John.
I was gonna say, yes, you do have to have a permit to sell eggs in Maryland. So if you're in Maryland, you have to get, you have to register your flock and you have to get an egg producer's license in order to sell.
And then
there are a list of regulations that you do need to follow.
And those are 2 different things, correct? I mean, a flock permit is different than the permit to sell eggs. I've got, right?
Right, they are different. However, if you just get an egg layer license, it has the permit number in it.
Okay,
so
all right.
It's kind of funny. So there are 2 separate things, but one combines both.
And how about, John,
And
broilers? How about selling broilers?
broilers, yeah, you would need to have a permit. You would need to have a premise permit.
And you can process up to 10,000 for yourself or something, right?
20,000.
20,000. Okay. Yeah. All right.
But again, there's a lot of different rules. As far as equipment goes, I can answer that one too. It all depends on how much you want to do by hand. I've actually processed birds on a table out back with none of the equipment, but it's a lot easier if you have the equipment and it goes a lot faster.
So here's the killing cones, and you definitely got to have killing cones. This is fancy. This is stainless steel. You can make them yourself, okay? Because this is probably a little pricey, stainless steel and everything. So you can make these yourself with plastic cones, all right? But you got to have killing cones. And then you got to have you have to have a scalder that holds the temperature correctly, and that rotates the birds through it. You got to. I think, John, I hope you back me up on that. You got to have a scalder, a good scalder, rather than a pot rather than just a pot over a gas burner. You got to have a real scalder that churns the birds. And go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree it makes it a lot easier, but I've seen these all done without any equipment. So minimum is none, but man, it makes it a lot better. And if you're trying to make money, you want the equipment.
And I'm sorry I don't have a picture of the plucker in here. I think pluckers are very useful also. The pluckers get almost all those feathers off so that the people on the table don't have to pull out hardly any feathers. Even those little pin feathers are pretty, it gets most of them. And, stainless steel table. So I think that I would be guessing. I guess that